Well, good morning, everyone. You may notice that I am not Lieutenant General Dennis Kroll. We can all do a collective aw that you have me instead. I'm Kim Chris, Director of SC Tech and Cybersec SC, and I'm very delighted to be here today with Mr. Kenneth Bible from Homeland Security. And we're going to talk a little bit about transitioning the workforce. And so we're just going to get right into it. If anybody has questions, we will have time for that because I know there's a lot of students in the house today that probably want to ask this gentleman some important things about how they can help direct their future. But just starting off, Mr. Bible, what is transitioning the cybersecurity workforce? Who are we transitioning?
Right. So that's
where are we transitioning?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that's why this topic was of such interest. I mean, I kind of break it down into three areas when we talk about transition in the workforce. You know, one is a personal, kind of a personal story of things. I started out my career as a nuclear engineer at Charleston Naval Shipyard in Charleston, South Carolina. I spent 10 years in that field, and then as the base closure was happening, got introduced, actually researched some technologies to help with mapping the hazardous and radioactive waste sites in the shipyard as we closed down. And I found this budding technology called GIS, Geographic Information Systems, and started using it to go do the mapping, which was previously being done by like 10 computer-aided design operators every morning to go update the map of the shipyard where things were. Long story short, I was supposed to go looking at a job to go become the deputy facilities director for the Navy command that was coming into Charleston, which was then Nice East, became Spay-War, and now is called Niewek Atlantic. And my resume got picked up by one of the technical department directors, a fellow by the name of Bob Von Allman, and he looked on my resume, called me in for an interview, and he says, "Ken, I see here you know something about GIS. I think that has applicability in command and control for the Navy. Would you come work for me?" And I always say that was when my career took a 90-degree turn from being just on the drawing table or in the CAD room doing engineering and design to information technology, which then translated into learning about modeling and simulation, about networks, taking a tour up in D.C. When the Navy was recompeting the NMCI, the Navy Marine Corps Intranet, which became the Next Generation Enterprise Network, and ultimately to where I am today as the Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of Homeland Security. So I sometimes study that and say, well, how in the world did I end up in that position? So that's category one. It's the existing workforce that never contemplated being in cybersecurity or working in cyber, and ends up needing to, by force of circumstance or force of curiosity, to go change careers. And I would encourage young people today. I always tell folks that I talk with and people that I mentor that the job that you will probably be in 20 years from now hasn't been invented yet. So the most important thing you need to do is learn how to learn, which is the reason that you're in school. So I think that's a pretty powerful point. That's category one of transition in the workforce. The second is really where you're sitting right now as a student. If you're a student, how do we start to go bring new people into the field of cybersecurity and recognizing that the technologies that existed 20 or 30 years ago are different from what they are today? But importantly, kind of bringing everybody along. It's a pretty well-known fact that women in cybersecurity has been challenging. And we got to change that. Last year at the inaugural kickoff, I think, that's led to this conference, there was a lot of discussion about the fact that women they have tremendous capacity, but they're not going into the field. And so how do we change that? How do we bring that diversity, inclusion into the cybersecurity field and build those skills and build that interest so that we have that diverse workforce that we need? We can't leave half of the population behind. There's just too much work to be done. And then that's category two. And then the third category of transitioning the workforce, I think, goes to the technologies themselves. So even in the last 5 years, we've seen even cloud computing, which used to be just about infrastructure as a service. Basically, I'd take what I had in my on-premise data center, and I'd unrack the machines, and I'd put the software over in somebody else's data center. It was kind of like taking the junk from one data center to another data center. But the cloud has now evolved. Now we're talking about different models of platform as a service, the ability to actually configure the entire stack of a system as code. And so now cybersecurity changes too, because I'm looking at the code for those vulnerabilities that may result in the configuration of a system in the cloud. Another advance in the technologies have been around software as a service, where I really have very little control over the back end of a system, of a capability. And what I have seen is that our lines of business, the business functions, the financial offices, the personnel offices, even some of the acquisition community, they see the efficacy of moving quickly to these software as a service capabilities, but they don't understand the underlying security behind them. They don't understand the security of the data. And so that becomes a key skill set that we need to go develop. We need to morph with the technology. Another area of the technology that I think that is going to shape things going forward is the evolution of new types of computing. So you probably all heard about quantum computing. And it's probably a little ways down the road until it becomes something that's really a mainstream capability. But it fundamentally upends encryption at every level of an architecture. And so how do we start to prepare for that? How do we start to go build the engineers, the computer scientists, the mathematicians that understand that technology that can actually bring that to bear for organizations? So those are the three areas: the existing workforce, how do we go transition them into a new way of doing business and into into cybersecurity, into the right technologies, the up and coming workforce that's really going to have tremendous opportunity to shape the future. And as I said, the jobs they'll be doing in 20 years are going to be nothing like what they signed up for. I haven't climbed on a nuclear reactor in 30 years, but it was a lot of fun. But I don't do that anymore. So what will you be doing in 20 years, and how will you prepare yourself for it? And third, just the rapid pace of change of technology itself.
So let's say we have different pathways in this room, people who are taking different pathways, those who may already have a formal 4-year education, or those that are getting that now. What would you suggest is a path or first steps for those students or those prospective career changers to take?
Yeah, I think that and it's harder for the established worker to do. But I really do believe a lot in the ability to take on internships, or if you're a government worker, or you have the opportunity to take detail assignments, to kind of experience other aspects of the work, and to gain a little bit of insight into what you have a passion for. It's a little bit cliched that if you love what you do for work, it's never working. You're always going to have fun with it. So find out what are the things that you're interested in or that you have passion for through that type of internship approach. And you may find that you go down a completely different path than what you thought you would end up.
So when you're hiring
Yep.
for the Department of Homeland Security, a much coveted role, right, to work for the federal government in this type of role, what would you be looking for in an applicant?
Well, I certainly for myself, and again, going back to thing number one, right, recognizing that I've been one of those people that had to kind of change their entire viewpoint on what they wanted to do for a living. So I am really looking for people who are curious, who are not going to simply rely on what they know today, but are willing to go continue to learn, and that have that curiosity to go in and look for new ways of doing the work. The basic functions that most organizations perform, keeping the books, hiring people, managing logistics, the physical work hasn't changed all that much, but the way in which we do it has changed radically, right? That goes a little bit to just even in my job, I came over to the Department of Homeland Security from the Pentagon right as, well, it was in January 2021, so we were already in COVID, we were already in the pandemic. But my first year at Homeland Security, I probably saw my office, I could count it on 2 hands. I was teleworking most of the whole time. And so that technology, that business shift completely upended the technology stack. If we had not had the cloud-based office productivity capability in place, if we had not had at that time, the virtual private network capabilities to kind of punch holes through the firewall to access those systems inside of the organization, it would have been impossible to keep the organization running. And that was all about the technology foundation that had been set up by the CIO and had been put in place. So I might have lost track of your question at this point, but the point is that the workplace has changed radically. We're now having to go address how to deal with persistent telework, and in some cases, for me, I'm very interested in how do we enable remote work, because I think that in order to go bring in young talent, I often talk about the fact that DC is a very expensive area to live. So if I hire somebody on at say, and I'm just going to use the example as a GS-12, do I really expect them to come up and be able to go live a decent life inside the Beltway of DC? That's going to be a hard lift. I might have to do it for some period of time, but how can I start to facilitate their ability to choose where they live? Now, some jobs you just can't do it. If you've got to be in a highly classified environment, I probably can't accommodate that right now. But there's a lot of jobs where you don't need that, and so can I facilitate that telework or remote work option? But the main thing is just thinking about what I'm looking for in the employee at that point is, think about what that means. That means I'm not interacting with you daily in the hallway. I can't come down and check and see how that project's going. So I need to hire people who have that initiative and drive themselves, who will reach out to me and tell me that they're having a problem or tell me where they're at with the project, right? So I'm looking for those characteristics, the initiative, the drive, the curiosity. They are probably the 3 biggest characteristics in my mind.
All right, you heard it here. So I know we have a lot of people in the room that may want to ask Mr. Bible a question, so I'm going to transition to audience questions, and I'm actually going to walk down with my microphone. So who has a question that they would like to ask? I'll start here on the front.
So, Mr. Bible, thank you so much for your time today and then the great points you've laid out for us. Congress has given the federal government a lot of authorities like cyber accepted service and others to try to get that talent pipeline into federal service. Can you speak to that initiative at DHS or similar initiatives that you all are doing to hire talent?
Sure. So thank you for that question, because it is a big transformation. So last year, Department of Homeland Security launched an accepted service for cybersecurity talent. And we're really kind of kicking into high gear here this year. Department of Defense has been at work at this for a while in terms of transitioning the U.S. Cybercom, the military service cyber components, and portions of the Department of Defense CIO to this new pay system. It's essentially an accepted service that provides for there is a continuous training element to it. There's funding that's set aside to establish for continued development of your skills. And similarly, DHS in its program last year, we call it CTMS, or Cyber Talent Management System. We kicked that off last year. This summer, we've been on a hiring push. We've actually already made, the goal is to make 100 job offers between now and the end of the fiscal year, so the end of September. And we're going to make that. And what's been interesting is that a lot of those hires have been entry-level hires. And I think the advantage of this system is that instead of having the traditional GS 5, 7, 9, 11, 12, 13, what have you, now you have the ability to take an assessment test of your abilities at the next level, or to test your ability to be in a leadership role. And based on that, you can be moved into whatever position needs that skill, which is a very different model than the general schedule, the GS federal employment model. So we're early in the process. I'm pretty excited by the use of the system for the entry-level hiring. It's going to be a pretty powerful tool, I think, going forward, because it has allowed us to reach out and have some flexibility in the work location, in the pay setting, as well as having those resources to continuously provide the training opportunities for the individuals. But I don't want to go leave out some other opportunities that have come about too. DHS has a cyber intern program. So we're kind of focused at the high school and early college level to go give people experiences, young people experiences within DHS and the components. And if you're not familiar with DHS, which maybe not all of you are, it's a tremendously large organization made up kind of in the wake of the 9/11 tragedy. And it aggregated a bunch of different federal agencies. So the Transportation Security Administration, Customs and Border Protection, ICE, the Secret Service. So there's a lot of agencies that fall under the umbrella of DHS, and all of them are taking a look at how we use interns in this CTMS program to bring in talent. So, and I know also that the White House, there was just today, I believe, some releases on how the Executive Office of the President, all the different executive offices of the President, are aggressively using a stipend intern program. And I think the number that I saw was something like 220 hires for paid internships with the executive offices of the President. So the federal government is getting fairly aggressive about how do we build new talent, how do we bring those pipelines in, and then using things like CTMS, how do we, rather than hiring you for a billet and then having you kind of compete based on the time that you've been in your job, actually let you evolve the skills that you need for the next job, test to qualify for that job, and then be put into the job when the availability is there.
That's fantastic information, and we are unfortunately running really short on time. We have one more question with only about 2 minutes left.
Okay.
So what I would suggest is Mr. Bible will be here, and you can come and ask him questions after. He's agreed to do so.
Hey, Mr. Bible.
Hello.
You mentioned a significant gap in the cybersecurity field, women. Do you think it's true that there's a distinct lack of training opportunities which women and minorities would benefit from when trying to break into the industry?
So I don't know whether it's the training opportunity. I don't know. I mean, for me, the intern programs that I'm talking about, certainly I don't think there's a gap in terms of the opportunities for things like internships. I do think that there's some element that is missing in terms of the ability to keep the engagement through into a career. And I don't know exactly what that is. Last year we kind of posited that that was something that probably could be studied to kind of determine what could be done. I do believe that there is a need for people to see people like them within the jobs, and that's a real encouragement and creates that mentorship along the spectrum of a career. But I don't know how that translates in terms of the educational opportunities. I don't think there's anything in the educational opportunities that would distinguish or prevent the participation by anyone who has an interest. But there's some other factor that's causing this gap particularly between women and men. I mean, it really was stark, the fall off in terms of women staying in the cybersecurity field. And I've tried to do some things with that in my own organization. I've actually got about a 50-50 mix of men and women in the organization. And I will say that I have tried to go make sure that we have mentors, that we have opportunities to kind of bolster and support the women who are in the field as they move along in their careers. But I think I came away from last year, and I'm really fast. I want to hear what some of the other speakers today have to say on the topic, but it struck me that with all the vacancies in cybersecurity jobs, that the risk is that we're leaving half the population behind, and so we've really got to close that gap. And I don't know whether it's the nature of the programs that we build that allow us to kind of have more women stay engaged in cybersecurity longer in their careers until we kind of even it out more broadly across the nation. But I think there's definitely a research question there to kind of figure out. I haven't figured it out yet. I don't know that that gives you a satisfying answer, but I don't see it in the gap in the opportunities. Maybe others will have other opinions, but I haven't seen it. We've got such a focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion in just about every aspect of academia and the workforce, and particularly across the federal government, that I'm struggling with the idea that it's something structural. But I'm hoping that I'll learn something from the studies that come about, because I do think it's something to be fixed.
Thank
for the
you so
question.
much.